In the heart of a medieval village, justice was not written in laws, but carved into flesh and bone. A single mistake could strip you of your dignity, and one punishment could define your fate. This is the story of Thomas, a young farmer whose defiance against authority turned a bustling village square into a stage of cruelty, humiliation, and survival. In the heart of Ashburn, a village surrounded by dense forests and rolling farmlands, the market square was always bustling with activity. Merchants hawked their goods, children ran laughing through the streets, and villagers gathered to gossip about the latest news. But today, a somber structure dominated the square, the stocks. The stocks were a simple yet fearsome instrument of punishment. 2 thick oak planks, fitted with semicircular notches, locked the feet, and sometimes hands or even the head, of the unfortunate into place. A single lock secured the victim, making escape impossible. Once imprisoned, the person could only endure the humiliation of being on display for the entire village. The origins of the stocks were ancient, dating back to early medieval Europe. They were a symbol of public accountability, a tangible representation of law and order. Villagers believed that by witnessing the punishment, others would learn the dangers of breaking societal rules. Crimes as minor as theft, quarrels with neighbors, public drunkenness, or even disrespect to officials could land someone in the stocks. For those trapped, humiliation was the worst part. Friends and family could watch helplessly, while strangers jeered and mocked. Children would poke and prod, throwing small stones or rotten vegetables. Adults might shout insults or demand apologies before allowing the victim to move. Pain was secondary. The shame of public exposure was what made this punishment particularly effective. The magistrate of Ashbourne, an imposing man with a stern face and a booming voice, oversaw these punishments with a sense of righteous duty. Today, he had decreed that a young man named Thomas, a stubborn farmer known for his defiance, would face the stocks for minor tax evasion. The crowd murmured as Thomas was led forward, his shoulders squared despite the fear that gripped him. As he approached the wooden structure, the weight of history seemed to press down on him. The stocks had punished countless villagers over decades, leaving physical marks on the body and psychological scars that lingered for years. Every plank, every notch, every lock carried the weight of justice, fear, and authority. Thomas felt it all as the guards forced his legs into the rough wood, the cold metal lock snapping shut with a metallic clang that echoed across the square. The villagers' eyes bore into him, some with curiosity, some with cruelty, others with a faint glimmer of pity. Thomas knew that once in the stocks, he was not just a man being punished, he was a symbol, a warning, a spectacle. And in that moment, the wooden frame became more than oak and iron. It became a cage of judgment, fear, and medieval justice itself. Thomas had always been known in Ashburn for his stubbornness, a young farmer with strong arms and a sharp mind. He often questioned the village magistrate's orders, much to the annoyance of the authorities. But on this particular day, his defiance had gone too far. He had traded grain secretly with a neighboring village to help his family survive a poor harvest, bypassing the taxes imposed by the magistrate. Though minor in the eyes of some, this act was considered a challenge to the authority of the law. Dragged through the cobblestone streets toward the market square, Thomas could feel the eyes of villagers on him. Some whispered quietly, sympathizing with his plight, while others sneered, eager to witness his humiliation. The stocks loomed ahead, a silent, menacing structure of oak and iron. Thomas' heart pounded as he realized that his fate was now inescapably tied to this wooden frame. The guards forced him to kneel before the stocks. Rough hands gripped his legs, guiding them into the semicircular notches. The wood scraped against his ankles, leaving painful splinters, and the cold iron lock clicked shut. Thomas tried to shift his weight, but the more he moved, the more the wood pressed into his skin. He was immobilized, trapped, and entirely at the mercy of the crowd. Children ran forward, poking at his boots and laughing at his helplessness. Some adults threw rotten vegetables and scraps of old bread, treating him like a spectacle rather than a man. Thomas clenched his teeth, refusing to cry out, but every jeer cut deeper than the splinters. He could hear murmurs. That's what you get for defying the law. Let him learn respect, and maybe now he'll behave. Humiliation, it seemed, was the true punishment, far more than pain. As the sun rose higher, Thomas realized that this would be more than just a short lesson. The stocks were designed to prolong suffering. Hours could stretch into the entire day, and the more people observed, the greater the shame. Some villagers whispered about past prisoners who had fainted from the heat, hunger, and public scorn, never forgetting the agony of exposure. Yet even in this dire situation, Thomas refused to bow completely to despair. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for familiar faces. A few of his friends had gathered at the edges, offering silent support. One brave villager slipped him a small piece of bread, a gesture of compassion in a sea of ridicule. In that moment, Thomas realized the power of resilience. Even the stocks, a symbol of authority and punishment, could not break the human spirit entirely, and so, locked in the stocks, Thomas became more than a guilty farmer. He became a symbol of defiance, endurance, and the harsh reality of medieval justice, a lesson for the village, but also a quiet story of courage that only a few had the eyes to see. The sun climbed high above Ashburn, casting harsh light onto the cobblestone market square. Thomas remained trapped in the stocks, his ankles pressed painfully into the rough oak. Each movement sent sharp splinters biting into his skin, and the iron lock seemed to grow heavier with every passing hour. Time stretched endlessly, slow and merciless, as villagers continued to gather around, some out of curiosity, others out of cruelty. Being confined in the stocks was not merely physical punishment, it was psychological torment. The humiliation of public exposure was designed to break a person's spirit. Thomas could not escape the gaze of the crowd. Every whisper, every pointed finger, every mocking laugh etched itself into his mind. Children circled him like predators, throwing stones and shouting taunts, while adults debated loudly whether he deserved any mercy at all. The baker spat near his boots, murmuring darkly about how the law must be taught with visible consequences. The village crier walked past, announcing the hour, reminding Thomas that the world around him continued its rhythm while he remained immobilized. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, thirst burned his throat, and the heat of the day made his skin ache. Sweat ran down his face, mingling with tears he refused to shed. But the physical pain was minor compared to the shame of being a spectacle for everyone he had known since childhood. Thomas' friends and family hovered at the edge of the crowd. Some pleaded with the magistrate to shorten the punishment, but the magistrate's face remained impassive, his voice firm. Justice must be seen, he declared. A lesson not just for Thomas, but for all who might defy the law. The weight of authority pressed down on the square, tangible in every scolding word, every vigilant eye. As the hours dragged on, Thomas began to notice the subtle interactions of the villagers. Some threw bread or water, small acts of compassion in a sea of mockery. Others whispered to their children, telling stories of previous prisoners who had endured the same fate. Each act, each word, was a reminder of the dual nature of punishment in medieval times, physical pain intertwined with social disgrace, and both were equally important in shaping behavior. By evening, Thomas' legs were blistered, his skin raw, yet his resolve remained. Though the stocks held his body captive, they could not fully conquer his spirit. Through the torment, he understood the true power of medieval justice. It was not just about punishing crime, but teaching obedience through fear and shame. The stocks, though simple in design, carried centuries of human experience, each notch engraved with lessons in endurance, authority, and survival. Thomas, trapped yet defiant, became a silent teacher that day. To some, he was a warning, to others, an example of resilience. And in the long hours of agony, he realized that survival was not only about enduring pain, it was about maintaining dignity when all the world sought to strip it away. As the day dragged on, the weight of the stocks pressed relentlessly against Thomas's legs. The splinters had dug deeper into his skin, and blisters formed where the rough oak had scraped his ankles. Each movement sent shockwaves of pain through his body, yet he could do nothing but remain still, locked in place. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the square, but the humiliation Thomas endured showed no sign of fading. The village crowd had grown larger by the afternoon. Farmers paused their work to stare, merchants closed their shops to watch, and even travelers passing through Ashbourne slowed their pace to witness the punishment. The stocks, though simple in construction, had transformed the young farmer into a public spectacle. Every insult shouted, every finger pointed, chipped away at his dignity. Medieval punishment was as much psychological as it was physical. The magistrate understood that fear and shame were powerful tools. While the pain from the stocks was temporary, the memory of being displayed in front of one's community could last a lifetime. Villagers whispered stories of previous prisoners who had been confined for hours, sometimes days, leaving them broken in spirit, haunted by the knowledge that the world had watched them suffer. Thomas' hunger gnawed at him, and thirst parched his throat. A small child offered him a scrap of bread, while an elderly woman muttered a prayer for mercy. Yet these fleeting acts of kindness did little to ease the overwhelming despair. The crowd's laughter and ridicule reminded him that even compassion had limits in this society. Justice demanded spectacle, and the spectacle demanded suffering. The psychological weight was most severe. Each sneer, each whispered rumor, seemed to linger in the air, suffocating Thomas' pride. Even familiar faces, the friends who had come to watch from a distance, could not shield him from the public gaze. The villagers believed that witnessing punishment instilled obedience. To them, Thomas's suffering was not cruel but necessary. A lesson etched not in books, but in the flesh and memory of the community. By evening, Thomas felt both physically exhausted and emotionally drained. Yet within him stirred a quiet defiance. Though humiliated, he refused to let the shame define him. His ordeal was a mirror of medieval justice itself, harsh, public, and unyielding, but ultimately a test of endurance and character. He realized that survival in this society was not merely a matter of obeying laws. It was a matter of weathering the judgment of an entire community and emerging with the spirit intact. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the shadows of the stocks stretched across the cobblestones. Thomas' ordeal was far from over, but in the midst of pain and shame, he discovered a resilience that the magistrate could not lock away. Even in the harsh reality of medieval justice, the human spirit could endure, silently defying the cruelty of those who sought to control it. As twilight descended on Ashbourne, a bell rang across the market square, signaling the end of Thomas' punishment. The magistrate's guards approached, their faces stern yet slightly relieved. Their task completed. Slowly, the heavy iron lock was lifted from Thomas' ankles, and he felt the rough oak give way beneath him. Relief flooded through his body, but it was accompanied by lingering pain, exhaustion, and the ache of humiliation that no time could instantly erase. Thomas stumbled from the stocks, his legs stiff and blistered, but he forced himself to stand tall. Around him, the crowd murmured, some with curiosity, others with judgment. Children giggled quietly, still fascinated by the spectacle, while a few villagers shook their heads, muttering about the harshness of justice. Even as he was freed, Thomas realized that his punishment was far from over. The memory of hours in the stocks, the laughter, the pointed fingers, and the whispered gossip would follow him for months, if not years. Yet Thomas' release also offered a chance for reflection. He remembered the day's events vividly. The heat of the sun on his shoulders, the sting of splinters, the unrelenting eyes of his neighbors, every detail, every insult, and every act of cruelty or fleeting kindness taught him something profound about human nature and the society he lived in. The stocks were more than a punishment. They were a lesson in obedience, endurance, and the precarious balance of authority and mercy in medieval life. He walked slowly toward the edge of the crowd. Supported by friends who had remained nearby, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and relief. Thomas considered the lessons he had learned: humility, patience, and the importance of navigating a world governed by rules that were often harsh and arbitrary. The stocks had been a teacher, harsh yet effective, demonstrating the consequences of disobedience and the fragility of personal reputation in a small, tightly knit community. Despite the lingering pain, Thomas felt a quiet sense of resilience. He had endured what many would have considered unbearable, yet he had survived not just physically, but mentally. The humiliation had been profound, but it had not destroyed his spirit. The experience left him wiser, more cautious, and deeply aware of the human capacity for cruelty, and for compassion, however rare it might appear. By the time Thomas reached his home, the market square was empty, the stocks standing silent in the fading light. He paused to glance back, seeing the wooden structure as both a reminder and a warning. It symbolized the harsh realities of medieval justice, but also the strength required to withstand it. For Thomas, the ordeal was a defining moment, a test of courage and endurance, shaping the man he was and the man he would become. Years passed in Ashburn, and the memory of Thomas' ordeal in the stocks lingered long after the day of his punishment. The wooden frame remained in the market square, silent yet imposing, a relic of the village's harsh medieval justice. For newcomers, it was a curious structure. For longtime residents, it was a reminder of the power of authority and the consequences of defiance. The stocks were more than a tool for punishment. They were a social instrument, reinforcing the hierarchy of power and the fragility of reputation. Villagers whispered stories of those who had been confined before Thomas, and each tale added weight to the wooden planks, as if the collective shame of the past had seeped into the oak itself. It became a symbol not just of justice, but of history, of the way societies once operated under fear and spectacle. Thomas, now older and wiser, often reflected on his time in the stocks. He had emerged physically scarred but mentally stronger. The experience had taught him patience, humility, and the importance of understanding the fine line between justice and cruelty. He shared his story with his children and grandchildren, emphasizing the lessons learned from public punishment, human error, and the consequences of rash judgment. The village itself began to change. Over time, public punishments like the stocks became less frequent. Authorities slowly introduced fines, imprisonment, and more regulated forms of justice. Yet the stocks remained, standing as a silent witness to centuries of human behavior, reminding everyone who saw them that power, when unchecked, could easily become cruel, and that the consequences of disobedience, whether real or imagined, could linger long after the physical punishment ended. Thomas' story also had a moral for the villagers. While punishment was meant to enforce obedience, it could also teach empathy and restraint. Witnessing suffering firsthand made some villagers question the harshness of medieval law. They realized that authority should be tempered with justice, and that humiliation, though effective, often left wounds deeper than any physical scar. Even as modern systems of justice replaced the old ways, the stocks retained their symbolic power. They were a lesson frozen in time, a reminder of endurance, resilience, and the human capacity to survive in the face of cruelty. For Thomas, and for all who knew his story, the stocks were no longer just wood and iron. They were a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the enduring need for fairness, compassion, and understanding in a world that too often relied on fear to maintain order. Weeks after his release from the stocks, Thomas thought the ordeal was behind him. Yet whispers began to circulate in Ashburn. Grain thefts had continued, and some villagers suggested that Thomas had been falsely accused in the first place. Fear and uncertainty gripped the village. To assert control and maintain authority, the magistrate called for a public trial, summoning the entire community to the market square once again. Thomas, still limping from the lingering pain in his ankles, stood in front of the stocks once more, though this time as a defendant rather than a prisoner. The villagers gathered, murmuring anxiously. Some eyed him with lingering suspicion, others with sympathy, remembering the humiliation he had endured. The magistrate, draped in dark robes and holding a carved staff, proclaimed the trial open, his voice echoing across the square. Justice demands clarity. Let the truth be revealed before all. Evidence against Thomas was minimal. A few broken sacks of grain had been discovered, and the footprints of an unknown thief led through the muddy fields. Rumors swirled, and tension rippled through the crowd. Thomas's friends and family spoke on his behalf, passionately defending his innocence. He has already suffered, they cried. The stocks have punished him enough. But the magistrate raised a hand, silencing them. Justice, he insisted, required public proof, and punishment had to be fair, even if the process was cruel. Then came the twist. A traveling merchant entered the square, carting a bundle of stolen grain. With trembling hands, he confessed to the thefts, naming other accomplices from a nearby village. Gasps of disbelief ran through the crowd. Thomas, who had been shamed publicly, had been innocent all along. Relief and outrage mingled in the eyes of the villagers as the truth emerged. The magistrate, though embarrassed, had no choice but to exonerate Thomas. The villagers cheered, some in shame, others in joy. Yet the ordeal left a permanent mark. Even though his name was cleared, Thomas could never forget the hours of humiliation, the pain of being displayed for all to see, and the vulnerability of being judged without evidence. The trial became a turning point in Ashbourne. The villagers began questioning laws and punishments more carefully, slowly replacing fear-based justice with reason and fairness. Thomas, once trapped in wood, now stood as a symbol of resilience and the importance of truth. The stocks remained in the square, a silent witness to human error and endurance, teaching all who looked upon them that injustice can touch even the innocent, and that courage and dignity are timeless virtues in the face of cruelty. Thomas's ordeal in the stocks was more than punishment. It was a reminder of a world where mercy was rare and justice was a spectacle. His suffering carved a warning into the memory of every villager who watched. But in the silence of that square, as the crowd dispersed and the sun dipped below the rooftops, one truth lingered: power may bind the body, yet the spirit of defiance can never be chained. And that is the legacy of those who endured the harsh justice of the medieval age.